International Journal of Health Policy and Management. Quality and speed are our culture and the keys to our success. Welcome to the audio summary section of the International Journal of Health Policy and Management.
Hello, my name is Lisa Parker. I want to talk to you today about our mental health app policy study. So health apps are the kind of apps that you might download onto your mobile phone. And they're a very popular entity. The business is booming in this sector. But there's a risk of harm for health app users, so privacy breaches or harm to health. Despite this risk of harm, there's a little bit of contention about what kind of regulation, or if any really, should be applied to this sector. So we wanted to explore this issue a bit more and take a look at the kinds of regulatory policies that were currently operating. We used the Australian mental health app market as our case study, and we looked for policies, and by policies I mean regulatory guidance for app development or app distribution or selection for use. So we used a purposive and systematic sampling technique looking at governments, industries and not-for-profit organisations. And we found 29 prominent policies that were relevant to the Australian mental health app market. These policies fell into 5 different sectors. So there's medical device, privacy, digital content, finance and advertising or marketing. The policies sat in one of 3 areas within their individual sectors. So they might be upstream policies, government legislation. They might be midstream policies, typically an industry, an app store code of conduct. Or they might be downstream policies, something like a post-market app certification program or a curated app library. We analysed all of these policies carefully, and we found that when we looked at what the policies were trying to do, what problems they seemed to be trying to solve, we found that most of them were trying to help the commercial players in this arena. So, for instance, they were trying to help app developers navigate the regulatory environment and produce a profitable app that stayed within the legislation. We found that very few of the policies were really aimed at improving consumer protection in this space. We also looked at who the policies were targeting, so who the policies were expecting would be acting to improve health app outcomes. And we found that the kinds of people who seemed to be targeted by policies were perhaps the least powerful people within this arena. So the app developers, for instance, who really have limited ability to make a big impact in this sector. We found that the policies tended not to target the most powerful entities. So there was very little guidance, for instance, to the app stores about what these app stores should be doing to ensure that the apps they provided in their marketplace were protecting consumers, for instance. So out of all these findings, we came up with a couple of we think they're important recommendations. So with such a siloed regulatory market, we felt that the industry and governments should really get together and work to have some kind of more cohesive and comprehensive regulatory framework. So maybe that would mean having one overarching body or entity that would take responsibility for regulation overall, making sure there were no gaps, for instance, in regulation. And that might enable a body like that to push through things like mandatory reporting for any adverse health outcomes from health app use. The second recommendation that we made was to push the big commercial entities to take more responsibility. So put pressure on, like the App Store, iTunes and the Google Play app stores, to make sure that they had really strong guidance for what kind of apps they would let into their stores. So for instance, we might put pressure on them to make sure that they had a very strict privacy set up, so that they would only allow apps that had excellent privacy policies, and that might mean apps that didn't collect information, personal information unnecessarily, and that allowed all app users to look at the kinds of personal information that have been collected on them and correct anything that might have been incorrect. So we'd really encourage consumers and consumer groups and other stakeholders in this area to lobby governments and industry to push through things like these recommendations. And I think that would really help to make the health app market a much safer environment for consumers and a much more enjoyable one. Thank you very much for listening.